The diner was like any other place you'd find on the outskirts of a small town. It wasn't fancy, but it had charm. Warm yellow lights spilled out from inside, making the glass windows glow softly against the dark evening sky. Cars passed by, occasionally on the nearby road, their headlights cutting through the quiet night. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and fried food, mingling with the low hum of conversation between customers scattered across booths and tables. Laura. Bennett stood behind the counter, wiping down a mug with a dishcloth. She moved slowly, her motions automatic after years of doing the same thing every day. At 28, she'd been working here long enough to know all the regulars. The truck drivers who stopped in late at night, the families grabbing dinner, after church even the teenagers sneaking in milkshakes when they thought no one would notice. Tonight, though, the diner felt quieter than usual. There weren't many people around, just a couple sitting near the window and an older man sipping black coffee in the corner. Her eyes drifted toward the last booth by the door. Someone new had come in about 10 minutes ago, a young man maybe, in his mid-20s. He looked out of place, dressed casually but neatly, his clothes clean but worn. His hair was short, military style, and his face carried a kind of tiredness that didn't match someone so young. He hadn't said much since arriving, just mumbled something vague about needing a menu before slumping into the booth. Now he sat there, staring at the laminated sheet in front of him without really seeing it. Laura sighed quietly to herself. She'd seen plenty of folks like this over the years. People weighed down by life, looking for somewhere to sit and breathe. For a while, diners were good for that. They weren't too busy, not too loud. Just enough noise to fill the silence without pressing down on you. Still, there was something about this guy that tugged at her curiosity. Maybe it was the way his shoulders sagged, or how his fingers tapped nervously against the edge of the table. Whatever it was, she decided to check on him. She tucked the dishcloth under her arm and walked over, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the tiled floor. When she reached the booth, she gave him a small smile. "Hey there," she said gently. "How's everything going?" The man blinked, startled, as if he hadn't realized she was standing there. For a moment, he just stared at her, his blue eyes wide and uncertain. Then he cleared his throat and tried to smile back, though it came out more like a grimace. Yeah, fine," he muttered, glancing down at the menu again. But his hands stayed frozen on the table, not moving to pick it up. Laura tilted, her head slightly studying him. Something told her fine wasn't quite accurate. "You sure?" she asked. "You seem like you've got a lot on your mind." For a second he hesitated, his jaw tightening as if he were debating whether to say anything. Finally he let out a shaky breath and leaned back against the booth. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I do." "Well, if you don't feel like talking, that's okay," Laura said quickly, holding up her hands. "But if you want to, I'm happy to listen. Sometimes it helps to get things off your chest." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of emotion break through the haze in his eyes. Gratitude? Relief? She wasn't sure, but it made her heart ache a little. "Thanks," he said finally. "That's nice of you." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "Most people wouldn't bother." Laura shrugged, setting the menu aside. "It's part of the job, I guess, making sure everyone leaves feeling a little better than when they came in." She gave him another encouraging smile. "So, what's your name?" "Ethan," he replied. "Ethan Cole." "Nice to meet you, Ethan. I'm Laura." She slid into the seat across from him, ignoring the slight creak of the vinyl cushion. "Now tell me, what's got you feeling so heavy tonight?" Ethan hesitated again, chewing on his lip as if trying to decide where to start. I used to be in the military," he began haltingly. "But I'm not anymore. Got discharged recently." "Oh," Laura said softly, nodding. "That must have been tough." "You could say that," Ethan admitted. He stared, down at his hands, which were now clasped tightly together on the table. "They said I wasn't fit for service anymore, Mental health issues, they called it. PTSD, anxiety, all that stuff. I mean, I knew I wasn't doing great, but hearing them say it, he shook his head, his voice trailing off. Laura listened intently, her expression calm and supportive. She didn't interrupt, letting him take his time. After a moment, he continued, his words coming faster now, as if he couldn't hold them back anymore. It's not just the discharge, though, he said. It's everything. Before I joined the military, I thought I knew what I wanted, you know? I thought I could make a difference, help people, protect my country. But now I don't even know who I am anymore. Everything feels wrong, like I don't belong anywhere. His voice cracked slightly and he stopped, swallowing hard. Laura reached out instinctively, placing a hand lightly on his arm. Hey, she said softly. It's okay. You're allowed to feel lost sometimes. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when we least expect it. Ethan glanced up at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Do you ever feel like that? He asked hoarsely. Like nothing makes sense anymore? Laura nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. More often than I'd like to admit. Growing up, things weren't easy for me either. My dad left when I was a kid, and my mom worked 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. I spent most of my teenage years juggling school and babysitting gigs and trying to figure out how to pay the bills. Some days I still wake up wondering if I'm heading in the right direction. Ethan studied her face, searching for something. Validation, perhaps, or understanding. Whatever he found seemed to ease the tension in his shoulders. I guess I'm not the only one, huh? He said with a weak chuckle. Nope, Laura replied, smiling warmly. Not by a long shot. But here's the thing. Even when life feels messy, you keep going, one step at a time. And sometimes, along the way, you find people who care enough to remind you that you're not alone. Ethan looked down at the table, his lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. Thanks, Laura, he murmured. I needed to hear that. Any time, she said, patting his arm before pulling her hand away. Now, how about we order you something to eat? Food always helps, trust me. He laughed softly, nodding. Yeah, okay, thanks. As Laura stood up and headed back to the kitchen to put in his order, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder at him. He still looked tired, but there was a tiny spark of hope in his eyes now, a glimmer that hadn't been there before. And for some reason that made her feel lighter too, like maybe she'd done something worthwhile tonight. Little did she know this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. The next morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made you want to take a deep breath of fresh air and feel alive. Laura woke up early, still thinking about Ethan and their conversation the night before. She hadn't expected to connect with someone so deeply during a routine shift at the diner. But there was something about him that stayed with her. His vulnerability, his honesty. It reminded her of herself when she was younger, lost and unsure of what came next. She got ready, quickly, pulling on a pair of faded jeans and a light jacket against the chill. As she stepped out of her car in the diner's parking lot, she noticed something strange happening in the fields behind the building. At first, she thought it might be a plane flying low, but then she realized it wasn't just any aircraft. It was an F-22 Raptor jet, sleek and powerful, descending smoothly toward the ground. Laura froze, staring at the sight. What on earth was a military jet doing landing in the middle of nowhere? It wasn't exactly common for advanced fighter jets to show up outside small-town diners. Other people were starting to notice too. Cars slowed down on the nearby road, and curious customers began spilling out of the diner, craning their necks to get a better look. Some pointed excitedly while others snapped pictures with their phones. Laura felt a mix of awe and unease as the jet touched down gracefully in the open field. Its engines roared loudly, drowning out the murmurs of the growing crowd. For a moment, everything seemed surreal, like something out of a movie. Then 2 figures climbed out of the cockpit, men in uniforms, their postures straight and professional. They scanned the area briefly before heading toward the diner. Is this some kind of joke? Muttered one of the regulars, scratching his head. What do they want here? Laura didn't have an answer. Instead, she watched nervously as the two officers approached the group. One of them raised a hand politely, signaling for everyone's attention. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice calm but authoritative. "We're looking for someone named Laura Bennett. Is she here?" Every eye turned to Laura, who blinked in surprise. "That's me," she said hesitantly, stepping forward. Her heart raced as the officers walked over, stopping a few feet away. Up close, they looked even more intimidating, their badges gleaming under the morning sunlight. "Miss Bennett," the taller officer began, offering her a polite nod. "My name is Captain Lewis, and this is Lieutenant Harris. We apologize for the unexpected visit, but we need to speak with you urgently." "About what?" Laura asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "I don't understand. Why are you here?" Captain Lewis exchanged a glance with his companion before answering. "It's regarding a young man named Ethan Cole. You spoke with him recently, correct?" Laura's stomach tightened. "Ethan, what did they want with him?" "Yes, I talked to him last night," she admitted cautiously. "He came into the diner. He seemed upset, so I tried to help. But why are you asking about him?" The officers shared another look, this one harder to read. "Mr. Cole mentioned your interaction during his debriefing," Lieutenant Harris explained. "He credited your kindness with helping him regain clarity after a difficult period. High-ranking officials overseeing his program have taken note of your involvement and would like to express their gratitude personally." Laura frowned, trying to make sense of what they were saying. "Wait, hold on. What program? I don't know anything about whatever you're talking about." Captain Lewis sighed, glancing around at the growing number of onlookers. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," he suggested. "It's a sensitive matter." Reluctantly, Laura agreed. She led them inside the diner, which was mostly empty since the breakfast rush hadn't started yet. They sat down at a booth near the window, far enough from prying ears. Laura folded her arms across her chest, feeling increasingly uneasy. "Okay," she said firmly. "Explain. What's going on?" Captain Lewis leaned forward slightly, his tone serious but reassuring. "Ethan Cole is, or rather was, part of an experimental initiative within the U.S. Air Force. This program focuses on enhancing human capabilities using cutting-edge technology. However, due to unforeseen complications, Mr. Cole was discharged. His psychological state deteriorated significantly during his service, and your intervention appears to have played a crucial role in stabilizing him." Laura stared at them, her mind racing. Experimental programs? Human enhancement? None of it sounded real. "So, let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You're telling me Ethan was involved in some top-secret military project, and now you think I helped him somehow?" "In essence, yes," Lieutenant Harris confirmed. "Your compassion and support had a measurable impact on his recovery. Given the importance of his contributions, we'd like to extend an invitation for you to visit our facility. It's simply a gesture of appreciation, nothing more." Laura shook her head, overwhelmed by the absurdity of the situation. "This is insane," she muttered. "I'm just a waitress. I serve coffee and take orders. I don't belong in some secret military base." "We understand your hesitation," Captain Lewis said gently. "But rest assured this isn't dangerous. We merely wish to thank you properly and provide insight into the work being done. You'll be free to leave whenever you choose." Laura hesitated, torn between skepticism and curiosity. Part of her wanted to refuse outright, to walk away and pretend none of this had happened. But another part couldn't ignore the nagging questions swirling in her mind. Who was Ethan really? What kind of project had he been part of? And why did these officers seem so intent on bringing her along? Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "Fine," she said. "I'll come. But only because I want answers. If anything feels off, I'm leaving." Captain Lewis smiled faintly, clearly relieved. "Understood, Miss Bennett. Thank you for your cooperation." Within an hour, Laura found herself climbing aboard a helicopter that had arrived shortly after the F-22 jet departed. The ride was bumpy but breathtaking, offering sweeping views of the rugged landscape below. As they flew deeper into the desert, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something far bigger than herself. When they landed at a remote base hidden among the arid hills, Laura's nerves kicked into overdrive. Rows of buildings stretched out before her, surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their faces stern and focused. It was nothing like the cozy familiarity of the diner back home. Ethan was waiting for her near the entrance, standing beside a woman in a lab coat. When he saw Laura, his face lit up with genuine relief. "Laura!" he exclaimed, rushing over to greet her. "I can't believe you're actually here." "You didn't give me much choice," she replied dryly, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "Care to explain what's going on?" Ethan glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "It's complicated," he admitted, "but I promise I'll tell you everything. Just not right now." Before Laura could press further, the woman in the lab coat stepped forward, introducing herself as Dr. Emily Grant. "Welcome to the facility, Miss Bennett," she said warmly. "We're honored to have you here. Please follow me. There's much to show you." As they walked through the compound, Laura took in her surroundings with a mix of wonder and apprehension. Advanced machinery hummed softly in labs filled with scientists in white coats. Screens displayed data streams and complex diagrams Laura couldn't begin to comprehend. Despite the impressive technology, there was an underlying tension in the air, a sense that not everything was as it seemed. By the time they reached a conference room, Laura's head was spinning. Dr. Grant gestured for her to sit, then launched into an explanation of the program's goals, pushing the boundaries of human potential, developing technologies to aid national security, and exploring possibilities once thought impossible. But as fascinating as it all sounded, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important, something big. And she had a sinking suspicion that Ethan knew more than he was letting on. Laura felt like she'd stepped into another world. Everything around her was unfamiliar. Bright lights, humming machines, and people moving quickly between stations filled with blinking monitors and strange equipment. The air smelled faintly of metal and chemicals, sharp and clinical compared to the comforting aroma of coffee back at the diner. She followed Dr. Grant and Ethan deeper into the facility, her mind struggling to process everything she saw. "This way," Dr. Grant said, cheerfully, leading them down a long hallway lined with doors marked with numbers and codes. "We'll start with the basics so you can get a better understanding of what we're working on." Ethan stayed close to Laura, his expression unreadable. Every now and then, he would glance at her, as if checking to see how she was handling all of this. Laura appreciated the gesture, but it didn't stop her from feeling completely out of her depth. What was she even doing here? She wasn't a scientist or a soldier, or anyone important enough to deserve an invitation to a place like this. Yet here she was, walking through a top-secret military base that looked more like something out of a sci-fi movie than real life. They entered a large room filled with glowing screens and holographic displays. Scientists moved about, typing commands into keyboards or adjusting settings on sleek control panels. In the center of the room stood a massive table projecting a three-dimensional image of what looked like a human brain intertwined with glowing wires and circuits. What's that?" Laura asked hesitantly, pointing to the hologram. Dr. Grant smiled proudly. "That's one of our key projects, a neural interface system designed to enhance cognitive abilities. It allows users to process information faster, adapt to complex scenarios, and even communicate telepathically within a network." "Telepathically?" Laura repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You mean, like reading minds?" "In a sense, yes," Dr. Grant replied. "But it's far more sophisticated than that. Think of it as sharing thoughts and data instantly, without needing verbal communication. For soldiers on the battlefield, it could mean the difference between life and death." Laura stared at the hologram, her head spinning. This wasn't just science fiction. It was real. And somehow Ethan had been part of it. She turned to him, her brow furrowed. How does any of this involve you? Ethan hesitated before answering. I was one of the test subjects, he admitted quietly. They used me to test the neural interface and other enhancements. At first it seemed amazing. I could think faster, react quicker, do things I never thought possible. But then, his voice trailed off, and he swallowed hard. But then what? Laura pressed, sensing there was more to the story. Things started going wrong, Ethan continued reluctantly. The enhancements were unstable. Some of us began experiencing side effects, memory loss, hallucinations, even seizures. A few of the participants, they didn't make it. He looked away, his jaw tightening. That's why I was discharged. They said I wasn't fit for duty anymore. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. No wonder Ethan had seemed so lost when she met him at the diner. Whatever they'd done to him had left scars, both physical and mental. But something still didn't add up. If the program was failing, why were they continuing it? And why bring her here? As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Grant spoke up again. Our goal is to refine the technology, she explained. Every failure brings us closer to success. With enough time and resources, we believe we can create a system that will revolutionize human potential. And what happens to the people who fail? Laura asked sharply, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. Are they just discarded? Dr. Grant's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. Of course not, she said smoothly. Their well-being is our top priority. We provide medical care and support to ensure their recovery. Laura wasn't convinced. There was something unsettling about the way Dr. Grant avoided meeting her eyes when she answered. And then there was the tension in the room, the way the scientists seemed too focused on their work to acknowledge her presence. Something wasn't right here. After the tour, Ethan pulled Laura aside while Dr. Grant went to check on some data logs. Listen, he whispered urgently, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. There's more to this place than they're telling you. Things they don't want you to know. What kind of things? Laura asked, lowering her own voice. Ethan hesitated, clearly torn. Finally, he sighed. Not everyone who failed the experiments left the program, he admitted. Some of them disappeared. I don't know where they are, but I've heard rumors about secret wings of the facility, about people being kept alive but trapped in simulations. I don't have proof, but I think they're using them for something worse than testing. Laura's stomach churned. Why are you telling me this? She asked. What do you expect me to do? I trust you, Ethan said simply. You helped me when I needed it most. Now I need your help again. Together, maybe we can find out the truth. Laura wanted to argue, to tell him this wasn't her fight. She was just a waitress, not some hero destined to uncover conspiracies. But, looking into Ethan's earnest eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not after learning what might be happening to those poor souls trapped in this place. Okay, she said finally, her voice steady despite the unease bubbling inside her. What's the plan? Ethan nodded, relieved. First, we need to gather evidence, prove what's really going on here. Once we have that, we can figure out how to expose it. Over the next few days, Laura and Ethan worked together in secret, sneaking around the facility during late hours when fewer people were around. They discovered encrypted files detailing plans for a new phase of experimentation, one involving alien technology recovered from a crashed spacecraft decades ago. Apparently, the military had been reverse engineering the tech, hoping to integrate it with human biology. It sounded insane, but the documents were undeniable. Their investigation led them to a restricted section of the base, accessible only with high-level clearance. Using a stolen keycard and careful timing, they managed to slip inside unnoticed. What they found there made Laura's blood run cold. Rows upon rows of experimental pods stretched out before them, each containing an unconscious individual connected to machines via wires and tubes. Monitors above the pods displayed vital signs and brainwave activity. indicating that these people were alive, but barely. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their bodies motionless except for the faint rise and fall of their chests. "Oh my God," Laura whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "Who are they?" Ethan shook his head grimly. "Test subjects," he said. "People who didn't survive the experiments, at least not in the way the higher-ups consider survival. They're trapped in virtual simulations, their minds, forced to run endless tests while their bodies waste away." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she took in the horrifying sight. These weren't just numbers or statistics. They were human beings, people whose lives had been stolen from them in the name of progress. She clenched her fists, anger boiling inside her. How could anyone justify this? "We have to stop them," she said fiercely, turning to Ethan. "Whatever it takes." Ethan nodded, determination hardening his features. "Agreed. Let's get out of here and figure out our next move." But as they turned to leave, a loud alarm blared through the facility, red lights flashing overhead. Someone had discovered their intrusion. Over the next few days, Laura and Ethan worked together in secret, piecing together clues about the facility's true purpose. They stayed up late into the night, sneaking through empty hallways when most of the staff had gone home. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the truth became. It wasn't just about enhancing human abilities anymore. It was something far bigger, far darker. One evening, as the base settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Laura and Ethan slipped into a restricted lab. The door required a key card, which Ethan had managed to borrow from an unsuspecting scientist earlier that day. Inside, the room was filled with glowing screens, humming machines, and shelves lined with strange equipment. At the center of it, all stood a large workstation surrounded by monitors displaying complex diagrams and streams of encrypted data. "This is where they keep the important stuff," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machinery. "If we can find anything concrete here, we'll have proof of what they're really doing." Laura nodded, her heart pounding as she glanced around nervously. Every second they spent in this room felt like a gamble. If anyone caught them, there would be no explaining their way out of trouble. But they didn't have a choice, not if they wanted to expose the truth. Ethan sat down at the workstation and began typing rapidly, navigating through layers of security protocols. He'd learned a lot during his time in the program, including how to bypass certain safeguards. Within minutes, he'd accessed a file labeled Project Horizon. "What's that?" Laura asked, leaning closer to look at the screen. "It's big," Ethan replied, scrolling through pages of technical jargon and schematics. "This isn't just about enhancing soldiers anymore. They've been experimenting with alien technology, stuff recovered from a crashed spacecraft decades ago." "Alien technology?" Laura repeated, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. "You mean like UFOs? That's real?" Ethan nodded grimly. "Apparently, yes. And they've been trying to integrate it with human biology. Neural interfaces, cybernetic enhancements, it's all connected. They think it'll give them an edge in warfare or exploration or I don't even know what else." Laura stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. Alien tech? Human experimentation? It sounded like something out of a movie, not real life. But the evidence was right in front of her. Rows of data logs detailing failed tests, side effects, and warnings about unstable results. As Ethan continued digging, Laura noticed something alarming. Names. Dozens of them, listed under categories, like test subject and deceased. Some were marked as terminated, while others simply read unknown status. Her stomach churned as she recognized a few of the names. They belonged to people Ethan had mentioned during their conversations, individuals who had disappeared without explanation. "They're using people like guinea pigs," Laura murmured, her voice trembling with anger. "These aren't volunteers, they're victims." Ethan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize how widespread it was. This goes way beyond me, Laura. We're talking about hundreds of lives ruined. Or worse." "Then we need to stop them," Laura said firmly, her fear giving way to determination. "We can't let this continue." Ethan hesitated, glancing at her with a mix of admiration and concern. It won't be easy. If we try to expose this, they'll come after us. Hard. I don't care, Laura replied, meeting his gaze steadily. We started this together and we'll finish it together. Whatever happens, we owe it to those people to tell the world the truth. After copying the files onto a small flash drive, they decided to investigate further. Ethan had heard rumors about a restricted section of the facility, a place where test subjects who hadn't survived the experiments were supposedly kept alive in virtual simulations. If they could confirm these rumors, it would provide undeniable proof of the program's atrocities. Using the same stolen keycard, they made their way to the lower levels of the base. The corridors grew colder and darker the deeper they went, the walls lined with pipes and cables. Emergency lights cast long shadows on the floor, creating an eerie atmosphere that sent shivers down Laura's spine. Finally, they reached a heavy metal door marked with a biohazard symbol and a keypad lock. Ethan entered the code he'd memorized from the lab's database, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. What they saw inside made Laura's blood run cold. Rows upon rows of experimental pods stretched out before them, each containing an unconscious individual connected to machines via wires and tubes. Monitors above the pods displayed vital signs and brainwave activity, indicating that these people were technically alive, but barely. Their bodies were frail, their faces pale and gaunt, as though they hadn't seen sunlight in years. Oh, my God, Laura whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took in the horrifying sight. These weren't just numbers or statistics. They were human beings, trapped in limbo, their minds forced to endure endless tests while their bodies wasted away. Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, though his own expression was grim. This is what happens when science loses its humanity, he said quietly. They don't care about the cost as long as they get results. Laura wiped her tears angrily. We have to shut this place down, she said, her voice shaking, with resolve. Right now. Ethan nodded. Agreed. Let's see if we can disable the systems from here. They moved quickly, searching for a control panel that might allow them to power down the pods. After a few tense minutes, Ethan found what they were looking for, a terminal linked directly to the simulation network. As he worked on overriding the commands, Laura kept watch, her ears straining for any sign of approaching footsteps. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the facility, red lights flashing overhead. Someone had discovered their intrusion. No, we're here, Laura shouted, panic rising in her chest. Almost done, Ethan replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. With a final keystroke, the machines powering the pods began to shut down. One by one, the monitors went dark and the faint hum of the equipment faded into silence. But they weren't safe yet. Shouts echoed from the corridor outside, growing louder as guards approached. Ethan grabbed Laura's hand, pulling her toward the exit. We need to move, now. They ran through the maze-like halls, their footsteps echoing against the walls. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer, the guards shouting orders and warning shots ringing out. Laura clutched the flash drive tightly, knowing it was their only hope of exposing the truth. Up ahead, a staircase led to the upper levels. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to escape. But as they rounded a corner, they were met with a group of armed soldiers blocking their path. Stop right there, one of the guards commanded, raising his weapon. Ethan stepped forward, shielding Laura with his body. You don't have to do this, he said, his voice calm but firm. Let us go, and no one else has to get hurt. The guard hesitated, glancing at his companion's uncertain, already generating text. The alarm blared relentlessly, echoing through the corridors like a warning siren. Red lights flashed overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls as Laura and Ethan ran for their lives. Their footsteps pounded against the cold concrete floor, each step reverberating in the confined space. Behind them, shouts grew louder. The guards were closing in. We need to move faster, Ethan yelled over the noise, his voice strained but determined. He grabbed Laura's arm gently, pulling her forward as they rounded another corner. Her lungs burned from the exertion, but she forced herself to keep going. She couldn't afford to slow down, not now, not when they were so close to freedom, though. Her other hand, Laura clutched the flash drive tightly, its smooth surface pressing into her palm. It was small, almost insignificant looking, but it held everything. The encrypted files, the evidence of unethical experiments, the truth about the people trapped in those pods. If they could get it out of the facility, they might have a chance to expose what was happening here, but first they had to survive. "This way," Ethan shouted, veering sharply to the left. They ducked into a side corridor, hoping to lose their pursuers in the maze-like structure of the bunker. Laura's heart raced as she followed him, her mind racing even faster. Every twist and turn felt like a gamble. Would it lead them closer to safety, or straight into a dead end? Up ahead, a heavy metal door loomed, blocking their path. Ethan skidded to a stop and immediately began working on the keypad beside it. His fingers moved quickly, punching in a sequence of numbers he'd memorized during their earlier explorations. Come on," he muttered under his breath, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Laura turned to face the direction they'd come from, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. She could hear the guards getting closer, their boots thudding against the floor, their voices sharp and commanding. Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Hurry, Ethan," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Finally, with a loud click, the door unlocked. Ethan pushed it open just enough for them to slip through, then pulled it shut behind them. On the other side, the air was cooler, quieter, a brief reprieve from the chaos they'd left behind. But they weren't safe yet. "Where does this lead?" Laura asked, panting as she leaned against the wall to catch her breath. "It should take us to one of the maintenance tunnels," Ethan replied, his tone urgent. "From there we can find a way outside." Without waiting for further discussion, they pressed onward, navigating the narrow passageway with only the dim glow of emergency lighting to guide them. The tunnel twisted and turned, branching off in multiple directions, but Ethan seemed confident in his choices. Laura trusted him implicitly. He'd been here longer, knew the layout better than she did. Still, every second that passed felt like an eternity. As they neared what looked like an exit, the sound of pursuit faded slightly, though it never disappeared entirely. Just when Laura started to believe they might actually make it, a new obstacle appeared. A locked gate barring their way. Beyond it, she could see the faint outline of daylight streaming in from above, a ventilation shaft leading to the surface. Ethan cursed under his breath, examining the lock. "It's electronic," he said grimly. "We'll need a code to get through." Laura's stomach sank. Time was running out, and they didn't have the luxury of trying random combinations. Then an idea struck her. "Wait," she said suddenly, pulling the flash drive from her pocket. "Maybe this has something we can use." Ethan's eyes widened. "You think it's worth risking?" "It's all we've got," Laura replied firmly. "Let me try." She handed him the flash drive while she rummaged through her bag, pulling out a small handheld device she'd borrowed from one of the labs earlier. It wasn't much, a basic data reader, but it was enough to access the files stored on the drive. With trembling hands, she inserted the flash drive and began scrolling through the information displayed on the tiny screen. "There!" she exclaimed, after a few tense moments. Buried deep within the documents was a list of security codes, including one labeled Maintenance Gate Override. Without hesitation, Ethan punched the sequence into the keypad beside the gate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then with a soft beep, the lock disengaged and the gate swung open. "Yes," Ethan breathed, grabbing Laura's hand as they scrambled through the opening. Fresh air greeted them as they emerged into the bright sunlight, blinking against the sudden change in light. They were in the middle of a rocky desert landscape, miles away from civilization, but at least they were free. For a fleeting moment, Laura allowed herself to feel relief. They'd made it out alive, and they still had the evidence needed to bring the facility's secrets to light. But before she could fully process their escape, Ethan stopped abruptly, his expression darkening. "What's wrong?" Laura asked, following his gaze. In the distance, several vehicles were speeding toward them, kicking up clouds of dust. Armed guards spilled out of the trucks, their weapons trained on the pair. "We're not done yet," Ethan said grimly. "Stay behind me." Laura's heart sank. She'd hoped they'd put enough distance between themselves and the facility to evade capture, but it seemed the fight wasn't over. As the guards advanced, Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Laura. "You don't have to do this," Ethan called out, raising his hands in surrender. "We're leaving, you can't stop us." One of the guards, a tall man with a stern face, stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly. "Stand down, Cole," he ordered. "You know how this ends." Ethan hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then, without warning, he lunged sideways, grabbing a nearby rock and hurling it at the nearest guard. Chaos erupted as the soldiers opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. Laura screamed, dropping to the ground instinctively. "Run!" Ethan shouted, shoving her toward a cluster of boulders for cover. "Get out of here!" "No!" Laura protested, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not leaving you!" "You have to," Ethan insisted, his voice breaking. "Take the flash drive and go. Find someone who can help. You have to finish this." Before Laura could argue further, Ethan charged at the guards, creating a diversion to give her time to escape. Heartbroken but resolute, she obeyed, clutching the flash drive as she fled into the wilderness. Each step felt heavier than the last, guilt weighing her down as she heard the distant sounds of struggle behind her. By the time she reached the edge of the desert, exhaustion had overtaken her. Collapsing onto the ground, she stared back in the direction she'd come from, praying Ethan was still alive. Though separated, she vowed to honor his sacrifice, to deliver the evidence to the world, and ensure that no one else suffered the same fate. Little did she know, her journey was far from over. Laura didn't stop running until her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the hard desert ground, gasping for air as tears streamed down her face. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, guilt, anger. But one thought dominated everything else. Ethan had sacrificed himself so she could escape. He'd trusted her to finish what they started, to expose the truth no matter the cost. And now she owed it to him to see it through. Forcing herself to stand, Laura staggered toward the nearest road, clutching the flash drive like it was her lifeline. It took hours, but eventually, she flagged down a passing truck driver who agreed to give her a ride into town. From there, she found a payphone and dialed the number of Daniel Harper, a journalist known for uncovering government corruption. She'd read about him once in an old magazine at the diner. If anyone could help her, it was him. "Who is this?" Daniel's voice crackled over the line, wary but curious. "My name is Laura Bennett," she said quickly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I have something you need to see, something big." Daniel hesitated before agreeing to meet her at a secluded cafe on the outskirts of Cheyenne. When they finally came face to face, Laura spilled everything: the diner encounter with Ethan, the F-22 jet, the secret facility, the experiments, the pods, and Ethan's sacrifice. At first, Daniel looked skeptical, but when she handed him the flash drive and he began scrolling through its contents, his expression shifted to one of shock and determination. This changes everything," he muttered, shaking his head. "If we release this, people will demand answers, heads will roll." "That's the point," Laura said firmly. "These people deserve justice. Everyone trapped in those pods, they're human beings, not test subjects." Daniel nodded, already jotting notes and planning his next steps. Together, they worked tirelessly over the following days, piecing together a story that would shake the nation. When the exposé hit the news, it spread like wildfire. Protesters gathered outside military bases demanding accountability. Politicians called for investigations. The world wanted answers. But for Laura, none of it felt complete without Ethan. She hadn't heard from him since their separation in the desert, and every night she lay awake wondering if he was still alive, or worse, if he'd been recaptured. Despite her exhaustion, she couldn't rest until she knew for sure. Then, one evening, a message arrived anonymously on her phone. "He's alive. Find him." Hope surged within her, followed by determination. Without hesitation, Laura packed a bag and set out again. tracking down leads and piecing together clues that might lead her to Ethan. Days turned into weeks. But finally, she discovered the location of a hidden underground bunker where survivors of the program were rumored to be held. Breaking into the facility wasn't easy, but Laura had learned a lot during her time with Ethan. Using stealth and quick thinking, she slipped past security systems and made her way deep into the compound. What she found inside nearly broke her heart. Ethan was there, slumped in a chair near a control panel, his face pale and drawn. His clothes were torn, his body battered, but he was alive. Around him, rows of pods stood deactivated, their wires and tubes disconnected. Someone had freed the trapped minds, likely Ethan himself, in a final act of defiance against the system that had wronged them all. "Ethan!" Laura cried, rushing to his side. She knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. "You're okay, you're going to be okay." Ethan blinked slowly, his eyes struggling to focus. When he recognized her, a weak smile tugged at his lips. "Laura," he rasped, "you came back." "Of course I did," she said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "Did you really think I'd leave you behind?" "I wasn't sure," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I thought maybe you'd hate me for letting you go alone." "Never," Laura replied, squeezing his hand. "You saved my life. Now let me save yours." With great effort, Ethan managed to sit up, straighter. "We did it, though," he said hoarsely. "The program, it's over. They can't hurt anyone else." Laura nodded, relief washing over her. "The story's out. People know the truth now. There's no turning back." Together, they limped out of the bunker and into the sunlight, leaning on each other for support. Outside, authorities were already arriving, alerted by Daniel's report. As paramedics rushed to tend to Ethan, Laura stood nearby, watching the chaos unfold with a mixture of pride and sorrow. In the weeks that followed, Ethan recovered slowly but surely, his strength returning bit by bit. With Laura by his side, he testified before Congress, sharing his experiences and advocating for stricter regulations on experimental programs. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, forged through shared sacrifice and resilience. Though scars remained, both physical and emotional, Laura and Ethan refused to let the past define them. Instead, they chose to move forward, determined to fight for a better future. For the first time in years, Laura felt a sense of purpose and knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone.